Amici, buongiorno, good morning friends, and welcome aboard the fast moving ghost caboose. Yes, it is time to address the original noise musicians of early 20th century Milan. It is time to say hello to our ancestors from the fascist period, or the pre-fascist period, the proto-fascist period, our brothers who had some very worrying political tendencies, the Italian Futuristi from Milan. We're going to read a text by Luigi Russolo, who built the world's first intono rumori, which are the noise instruments, performed noise concerts well before the glistening, gleaming works of genius of Masami Akita, aka Merzbow, your hero of Japanese noise music. We are going to start, therefore, with the Manifesto of Futurism and a part of it called The Art of Noises. This manifesto takes the form of a letter addressed to Balilla Pratella, the great futurist composer. In Rome, at the very crowded Teatro Costanzi, while I was listening to the orchestral performance of your revolutionary Musica Futurista with my friends Marinetti, Boccioni and Balla, I conceived a new art, the art of noises, the logical consequence of your marvellous innovations. Ancient life was all science. In the 19th century, with the invention of machines, noise was born. Today, noise is triumphant and reigns sovereign over the sensibility of men. Through many centuries, life unfolded silently, or at least quietly. The loudest of noises that interrupted this silence was neither intense, nor prolonged, nor varied. After all, if we overlook the exceptional movements of the earth's crust, hurricanes, storms, avalanches, and waterfall, nature is silent. In this scarcity of noises, the first sounds that men were able to draw from a pierced reed or a taut string were stupefying, something new and wonderful. Among primitive peoples, sound was attributed to the gods. It was considered sacred and reserved for priests who used it to enrich their rites with mystery. Thus was born the idea of sound as something in itself, as different from and independent of life, and from it resulted music, a fantastic world superimposed on the real one, an inviolable and sacred world. The Greeks greatly restricted the field of music. Their musical theory, mathematically systematized by Pythagoras, admitted only a few consonant intervals. Thus they knew nothing of harmony, which was impossible. The Middle Ages, with the developments and modifications of the Greek tetrachord system, with Gregorian chant and popular songs, enriched this musical art, but they continued to regard sound in its unfolding in time, a narrow concept that lasted several centuries, and which we find again in the very complicated polyphony of the Flemish contrapuntalists. The chord did not exist. The development of the various parts was not subordinated to the chord that these parts produced in their totality. The conception of these parts, finally, was horizontal, not vertical. The desire, the search, and the taste for the simultaneous union of different sounds, that is, for the chord, the complete sound, was manifested gradually, moving from the consonant triad to the consistent and complicated dissonances that characterize contemporary music. From the beginning, musical art sought out and obtained purity and sweetness of sound. Purity and sweetness of sound. Afterwards, it brought together different sounds, still preoccupying itself with caressing the ear with suave harmonies. Still preoccupying itself with caressing the ear with suave harmonies. As it grows ever more complicated today, Musical art seeks out combinations more dissonant, stranger, and harsher for the ear. Thus it comes even closer to the noise sound. This evolution of music is comparable to the multiplication of machines, which everywhere collaborate with man. Not only in the noisy atmosphere of the great cities, but even in the country, which until yesterday was normally silent. Today, the machine has created such a variety and contention of noises that pure sound, in its slightness and monotony, no longer provokes emotion. In order to excite and stir our sensibility, music has been developing towards the most complicated polyphony and towards the greatest variety of instrumental timbres and colours. It has searched out the most complex succession of dissonant chords, which have prepared in a vague way for the creation of musical noise. The ear of the 18th century man would not have been able to withstand the inharmonious intensity of certain chords produced by our orchestra, with 3 times as many performers as that of the orchestra of his time. But our ear takes pleasure in it, since it is already educated to modern life, so prodigal in different noises. Nevertheless, our ear is not satisfied and calls for greater acoustical emotions. Musical sound is too limited in its variety of timbres. The most complicated orchestras can be reduced to 4 or 5 classes of instruments different in timbres of sound: bowed instruments, metal winds, woodwinds, and percussion. Thus, modern music flounders with this tiny circle, vainly striving to create new varieties of timbre. We must break out of this limited circle of sounds and conquer the infinite variety of noise sounds. Everyone will recognize that each sound carries with it a tangle of sensations, already well known and exhausted, which predispose the listener to boredom, in spite of the efforts of all musical innovators. We Futurists have all deeply loved and enjoyed the harmonies of the great masters. Wagner and Beethoven have stirred our nerves and hearts for many years. Now we have had enough of them, and we delight much more in combining in our thoughts the noises of trams, of automobile engines, of carriages and brawling crowds, than in hearing again the eroica or the pastorale. We cannot see the enormous apparatus of forces that the modern orchestra represents without feeling the most profound disillusionment before its paltry acoustical results. Do you know of a more ridiculous sight than that of 20 men striving to redouble the mewling of a violin? Naturally, that statement will make the musicomaniacs scream and perhaps revive the sleepy atmosphere of the concert halls. Let us go together, like Futurists, into one of these hospitals for anemic sounds. One of these hospitals for anemic sounds. There, the first beat brings to your ear the weariness of something heard before, and makes you anticipate the boredom of the beat that follows. So let us drink in from beat to beat those few qualities of obvious tedium, always waiting for that extraordinary sensation that never comes. Meanwhile, there is in progress a repugnant medley of monotonous impressions and of the cretinous religious emotion of the Buddha-like listeners, drunk with repeating for the 1000th time their more or less acquired and snobbish ecstasy. Away, let us leave, since we cannot for long restrain ourselves from the desire to create finally a new musical reality by generously handing out some resounding slaps and stamping with both feet on violins, pianos, contrabasses, and organs. Let us go! Russolo seems to be, for me, referencing the borderline fetishism we have today in the Western musical canon and the stages we set for orchestras. The violin. The violin has its own role, its own part in the orchestra that is above all. It's always at the height, supposedly because in our excessive arrogance, it is supposed to sound the most like the human voice. Violins, personally, do not do it for me. There are many and plenty more instruments that excite me, like its bigger cousin, the cello, with its greater variety. And what better way to describe the concert hall, as Russolo does, as hospitals for anemic sounds. It cannot be objected that noise is only loud and disagreeable to the ear. It seems to me useless to enumerate all the subtle and delicate noises that produce pleasing sensations. To be convinced of the surprising variety of noises, one need only think of the rumbling of thunder, the whistling of the wind, the roaring of a waterfall, the gurgling of a brook, the rustling of leaves, the trotting of a horse into the distance, the rattling jolt of a cart on the road, and the full, solemn and white breath of a city at night. Think of all the noises made by wild and domestic animals, and of all those that a man can make without either speaking or singing. Let us cross a large modern capital with our ears more sensitive than our eyes. We will delight in distinguishing the eddying of water, of air or gas in metal pipes, the muttering of motors that breathe and pulse with an indisputable animality, the throbbing of valves, the bustle of pistons, the shrieks of mechanical saws, the startings of trams on the tracks, the cracking of whips, the flapping of awnings and flags. We will amuse ourselves by orchestrating together in our imagination, the din of rolling shop shutters, the varied hubbub of train stations, ironworks, thread mills, printing presses, electrical plants, and subways. Nor should the newest noises of modern war be forgotten. Recently, the poet Marinetti, in a letter from the trenches of Adrianopolis, described to me with marvellous free words the orchestra of a great battle. This requires a little bit of introduction. Marinetti was the leader of the Futurists. He was an avowed fascist, and he wrote, I feel, very inferior poetry, pre-Dadaist, unless I've got the chronology wrong. He collaborated with the Dadaists. He exchanged letter with Tristan Tzara. And it might, at this point, to get you a real feel of what he was up to, read parts of the Italian in my British accent, of course. What better way to appreciate the Futurists than it being mutated, chewed and spat out in the mouth of a hungry Brit. I might read a few lines here in English, then convert to Italian and skip over most of it. So this is, as what Russolo describes, is his marvellous free words. Every 5 seconds, siege cannons gutting space with a chord, zang tum tum, mutiny of 500 echoes, smashing, scattering it to infinity. In the centre of this hateful zang tum tum area of 50 square kilometres, leaping burst lacerations, fists, rapid fire batteries, violence, ferocity, regularity, this deep bass scanning the strange noise, frantic crowds of the battle fury, breathless ears, eyes, nostrils open, load, fire. They worshipped the Futurists, they worshipped war, they worshipped battle, they worshipped any form of speed and technological innovation. I'm going to do my best. Ogni 5 secondi cannoni di assedio, sventrare spazio con un accordo tantum. Oh man, this is all'infinito nel centro di quei tantum spacciati ampiezza chilometri quadrati, violenza. I'm just reading words to give you a feel of it. Schiumi, marizza, carvarena, crocra, grida degli ufficiale, odori di fieno, fango sterco, non sento più i miei piedi gelati, odori di salnitro, odore di marcio, timpani, flauti, clarini, dovunque, basso, alto, uccelli, cinguettare, dondan, dondinbe, bastonatissimi, suonare, grandi fragiori, non cancellare, tom tom, zang tom tom, l'orchestra dei rumori di guerra, gonfiarsi sotto una nota, blah 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 blah. You get the idea. Again, if any Italian speakers out there are having their ears bleeding at the moment, I have no apology for you. You should excuse yourself and your ears, which are wrong, not me. I'm joking, of course. I'm not pretending to be any expert, but you get the idea of the sonic variety, the lack of syntax, or the lack of punctuation, I should say, just the sheer joy of the word itself. It doesn't really do anything for me. So how do we apply this to music, pure music? Russolo starts again. We want to give pitches to these diverse noises, regulating them harmonically and rhythmically. Giving pitch to noises does not mean depriving them of all irregular movements and vibrations of time and intensity, but rather assigning a degree or pitch to the strongest and most prominent of these vibrations. Noise differs from sound, in fact, only to the extent that the vibrations that produce it are confused and irregular. Every noise has a pitch, some even a chord, which predominates among the whole of its irregular vibrations. Now, from this predominant characteristic, pitch derives the practical possibility of assigning pitches to the noise as a whole. That is, there may be imparted to a given noise not only a single pitch, but even a variety of pitches without sacrificing its character, by which I mean the timbre that distinguishes it. Thus, some noises obtained through a rotary motion can offer an entire chromatic scale, ascending or descending, if the speed or motion is increased or decreased. On YouTube, there is actually two records of this, one of the first some noise performances in Paris, written by Russolo's brother Antonio, not Russolo. And they're really boring, and I haven't put them in the description. They just sound like slightly distorted orchestral noises with the sound of a machine farting. They're not that exciting, and I think it's part of my point that it's really not good in life to invent. It's better to innovate. And inventors aren't usually that good at actually manifesting the idea. So the people who really picked up on this, the people that I care about, not John Cage and not Arose and not those sorts of people. It's people in the late 70s, early 80s onwards, particularly people influenced by industrial music and psychedelic rock. And of course, it resides in Japan. The Japanese noise musicians, for me, really are the ones that manifest the art of noises in the best potential way. It only took, how many years? 65, 70 years for this actually to come in the world. I don't listen to John Cage with much pleasure, apart from the swinging radio music, that sort of thing. But all these ideas could only really be picked up and fully embodied, I think, with more electronic devices. Some people say Russolo's intorno rumori, the noise instruments, are the world's first synthesizers, which is sort of true. The intorno rumori were actually acoustical devices with quite elaborate mechanical processes, quite in an engineering sense, very advanced. But you can't really see inside them nowadays. They're encased in these boxes with these very large bell horns coming out of them. So I'm trying to make exciting the last paragraph, which I don't find exciting, which is where he's just talking about, well, every noise has a pitch or a chord, and if you recite that pitch, it doesn't make it necessarily musical or imitative of the hospital of anemic instruments, whatever he calls it, the concert hall. Every manifestation of life is accompanied by noise. Noise is thus familiar to our ear and has the power of immediately recalling life itself. Sound estranged from life, always musical, something in itself, an occasional, not a necessary element, has become for our ear what for the eye is a too familiar sight. Noise instead, arriving confused and irregular from the irregular confusion of life, is never revealed to us entirely and always holds innumerable surprises. Noise always holds for us innumerable surprises. A testament to my faith in life and my battle with depression is the fact that noise and music in general can always surprise me. I always find myself shocked at what these new things that I get excited by, these new noises and these new forms of music that really just light me up. There is no end to this, to the garden of earthly pleasures, which is the landscape, the tapestry of noises. My toaster sounds really good. My sandwich maker. It makes this amazing clicking sound, very comforting. The sound of a coffee percolator always reminds me of my father. The bubbling noise, the warmth, the smell, what it brings back to me, all coming from noises. We are certain then that by selecting, coordinating and controlling all the noises, we will enrich mankind with a new and unsuspecting pleasure of the senses. Although the characteristic of noise is that of reminding us brutally of life, the art of noises should not limit itself to an imitative reproduction. It will achieve its greatest emotional power in acoustical enjoyment itself, which the inspiration of the artist will know how to draw from the combining of noises. At this point, Russolo outlines 6 families of noises, 6 genre or kinds of noises, types of sounds that a futurist orchestra can soon realize mechanically. And I love the word to realize, to make real, to embody, to make flesh. In a sense, noise is made flesh, the word is made flesh, so to speak, in the shaking of your tympanum, your eardrum, then causing a vibration in your cochlea and spreading into your nervous system and through the body, triggering all of the emotions, potential feelings I mentioned before. And again, it might be nice to hear some of the Italian here. Of course, this is originally written in Italian. And I'm reading from this beautiful book, Manifesto del Futurismo, which I bought in a gallery when I made a little pilgrimage to Milan to see where Futurism comes from. So the 6 families of noises, by the way, the pages of this book are so thick. You can really feel and hear them. They're heavy with an intellectual weight. Possibly. Number 1 of the 6 families of noises. Hello, by the way, to Stephen Becker in Leeds. The Mecca of noise. Number 1. Roars, rombi. Thunderings, tuoni. Explosions, scoppi. Hissing roars, scroschi or scrosci, I don't know. Bangs, tonfi, booms, boati. The second family of noises, so we had thick there, I'm guessing quite awe-inspiring. Second one is thinner. Whistling, hissing, puffing. Fisci, sibili, sciuffi. Can I read that? Sorry, spoofy. Spoofy is puffing. What a great word. Spoofy. Spoofy. Ha. And to hear this in a foreign language, for me, is to really appreciate the noise. I think you can really get a love for a language in a pure state when you approach it as a foreigner, because you haven't grown up with it. To appreciate your own language is to become an alien of your own language, to take a step out of it and then come back to it. It's one thing about Portuguese really, really delights me, are these ultra common words that to me are just so beautiful. Com, with, C-O-M, the way it looks. Eu, me, or I, eu, E-U. Many more. Group 3 is a little bit more subtle and to me just sort of feels a bit more wispy and like the air. Number 3 of the group of families of noises: whispers, murmurs, mumbling, muttering, gurgling. Bisbigli, mormori or mormori, burbotti, brussi, gorgoli. Number 4 is a bit harsher. We have screeching, creaking, rustling, humming, crackling, rubbing. Stridori, stricoli, fruschi, ronzi, crepiti, stropicci. Number 5 feels a bit more naturalistic. Noises obtained by beating on metals, woods, skins, stones, pottery, etc. I'm not going to read it in Italian because it's less onomatopoeic. And number 6, voices of animals and people. Noises which come from us. And I feel there are many people who could be considered a noise musician who only use their mouths or who rely mostly on their mouths. Dylan Noyukas, Chocolate Monk label, lots of things on the Chocolate Monk label. Sheffield's Luke Poot, IDM Theftable, just name a few. So the voices of animals and people: shouts, screams, shrieks, wails, hoots, howls, death rattles, sobs. Gridi, strilli, gemiti, urla, ululati, which I think might be wailing, wails. Risate, rantoli, singhiozzi, or singhiozzi. In this list, we have included the most characteristic of the fundamental noises. The others are only associations and combinations of these. The rhythmic motions of a noise are infinite. There always exists, as with a pitch, a predominant rhythm, but around this there can be heard numerous other secondary rhythms. It's important to me that noise music isn't considered necessarily as some kind of ultra avant-garde punk rock, miserable, hysterical and anti-authoritarian. Noise can be joy. It could be considered a positive, an embrace of sound. For this reason, I would like to read. I have to reach over. Tomorrow morning, or later today, Lester Bangs, 2 of his texts or critiques, not that he'd like to use that word, he hated the word sophistication or competence. Lester Bangs wrote 2 wonderful pieces about noise coming from where he was. He wrote A Reasonable Guide to Horrible Noise. And he also wrote The Greatest Album Ever Made, which he believed, at least just as a kind of provocative tool, he believed was Lou Reed's Metal Machine Music, which, if you haven't heard, I'm excited for you. It's like that scene in Freaks and Geeks where Lindsay's handed the Grateful Dead record, American Beauty, and the hippie stoner who gives it to her says, "I just wish I could be you, so I could be, having never heard it again, having never heard it before, I could experience it from the beginning again, like having sex for the first time or making love for the first time." If you haven't heard Metal Machine Music, I'm almost envious of you for the joy that it could potentially bring to you. So homework is, of course, listen to Metal Machine Music, but we will be drenched in the glory of this album at some point. Lester Bang's critique of it and his celebration of it, playing it in a car stereo apparently, which I don't know how's possible in late 70s Detroit or New York or wherever it was he was living. To think how far we have come to masterpieces like Lou Reed's Metal Machine Music from the rather drab and theoretical world of the Futuristi of Milan in the early 1900s. So before I read the conclusion, I'd like to just point out the fascist element of the Futurists. Marinetti was the leader, avowed fascist, believed Italy should re-invade Abyssinia. I think that's Ethiopia. It used to be an old territory. They had dreadful views, but that almost makes me more determined to find the good. Yesterday I was preparing for a tarot reading today about the Tower, and I was going through the Old Testament, and I forgot quite how boring it is, how rubbish, how much time I'd spent defending parts of the Bible, but forgetting that so much of it is trash and stupid as well, completely violent. But that doesn't stop me finding the gold through the shit. I think that's the process we should do with any text. Could be any text, could be from any source. There has to be something good in certain texts, unless it's Ayn Rand. Okay. I have left 2 links about the connection of the fascists with the futurists. And a lot of it is to do with the worship of the new and of innovation. The second text I put in the description is fantastic. It's very long and it's on a Marxist website and explains not just why they worshipped in Milan in the 1910s, why they worshipped innovation on any level, including fascism, but why, say, Britain didn't, why Britain was so complacent. It's to do with the economy, according to this article, and there's a wonderful deconstruction of Tower Bridge in London and what it means. This idea of innovation in England was medieval, or in the medieval style, yet not being made in that period. And what makes, in any case, for me, these Italians very forward-thinking, despite embracing such horrible ideas. It just is true that fascism was a relatively new ideology, of course resuscitating certain old Roman ideals as well. So let's get on with the conclusion. Number 1, or I should say conclusions. It's written conclusions. Number 1, futurist composers should continue to enlarge and enrich the field of sound. This responds to a need of our sensibility. In fact, we notice in the talented composers of today a tendency towards the most complicated dissonances. Moving even farther from pure sound, they have almost attained the noise sound. This need and this tendency can be satisfied only with the addition and the substitution of noises for sounds. I forget when Rite of Spring was by Stravinsky. I think it was the early 1910s. But Stravinsky, I believe, viewed Russolo as a madman and then later adopted some of his ideas and sort of was quite supportive of him. At which point Russolo had not kind of given up, went back to painting, lived in a village sort of far away from Milan. And he dies either in 1945 or 1947. There's conflicting accounts on the internet. And we shouldn't forget that my point really is that their art wasn't very good. The Futurist art, in my opinion, doesn't stir me at all. I don't think it was. It may have been forward-thinking and innovative, but it wasn't actually very good or interesting. Very dull palette tones. I mean, this looks bright, but actually it's very sort of matte. And Russolo's paintings, you can find at least one of them in, I don't remember the name of I think it's just one of the public galleries in Milan. Russolo does a self-portrait. And it's just of his face floating in the kind of ether. And around his face are floating skulls. And he looks very sort of Edvard Munch existentialist. It's crap. If I had a son who did this on their 16th birthday, I would have hit him extremely hard until he would, in his delirium, sense a new kind of direction that wasn't quite so po-faced and serious. I think that's one of the biggest sins of these futuristi, is they really thought, being at the crest of the wave, they could take themselves so seriously. And that's why their art is so maudlin. Number 2. Futurist musicians substitute for the limited variety of timbres that the orchestra possesses today the infinite variety of timbres in noises, reproduced with appropriate mechanisms. The sensibility. So that's interesting. It wasn't just a case of let's record stuff and replay it. Recording technology was still quite primitive, I imagine. It's important to actually reproduce it using artificial instruments, which was quite forward-thinking. Number 3, the sensibility of musicians being freed from traditional and facile rhythms must find in noise the means of expanding and renewing itself, given that every noise offers a union of the most diverse rhythms in addition to that which predominates. Number 4. Every noise having its irregular vibrations a predominant general pitch, a sufficiently extended variety of tones, semitones and quarter tones is easily attained in the construction of the instruments that imitate it. This variety of pitches will not only deprive a single noise of the characteristics of its timbre, but will only increase its tessitura or extension. The practical difficulties involved in the construction of these instruments are not serious. Once the mechanical principle that produces a noise has been found, its pitch can be changed through the application of the same general laws of acoustics. I suspect Russolo understated how difficult it would be to make these instruments. Probably they are quite simple, but he was quite mechanically or engineeringly quite advanced, and his instruments were. So I suspect that he believed, either consciously or not, that by making these noise instruments, you would become more open to the world of noise. By getting to grips with the world of mechanisms of engineering, that you become a more consummated futurist. So the practical difficulties involved in the construction of these instruments are not serious. It can be achieved, for example, through decreasing or increasing of speed if the instrument has a rotary motion. If the instrument does not have rotary motion, it can be achieved through differences of size or tension in the sounding parts. Excuse me. Number 6. It will not be through a succession of noises imitative of life, but through a fantastic association of the different timbres and rhythms that the new orchestra will obtain the most complex and novel emotions of sound. Thus, every instrument will have to offer the possibility of changing pitches and will need a more or less extended range. Number 7. The variety of noises is infinite. If today, having perhaps 1,000 different machines, we are able to distinguish 1,000 different noises, tomorrow, with the multiplication of new machines, we will be able to distinguish 10, 20 or 30,000 different noises, not simply by imitation, but by combining according to our fantasy. According to our fancy. Number 8. Therefore, we invite talented and audacious young musicians to observe all noises attentively, to understand the different rhythms that compose them, their principal pitch, and those which are secondary. Then, comparing the various timbres of noises to the timbre of sounds, they will be convinced that the first are much more numerous than the second. This will give them not only the understanding of, but also the passion and the taste for noises. Our multiplied sensibility, having been conquered by futurist eyes, will finally have some futurist ears. Thus, the motors and machines of our industrial cities can one day be given pitches, so that every workshop will become an intoxicating orchestra of noises. So again, not forgetting that this is a letter. He finishes Luigi Russolo's letter to his friend. Dear Pratella, I submit to your futurist genius these propositions of mine, inviting your discussion. I am not a musician by profession, and therefore I have no acoustical prejudices nor works to defend. I am a futurist painter who projects beyond himself into an art much beloved and studied, his desire to renew everything. Thus, bolder than a professional musician, not worried about my apparent incompetence, and convinced that audacity has all rights and all possibilities, I was able to divine the great renewal of music through the art of noises. Luigi Russolo, Milan, March 11th, 1913. Russolo was poor. For the latter half of his life, he lived on a soldier's pension. I am unable to find out in which war he actually fought. He lived in a village and he devoted himself to spiritualism, which was emerging in the late 19th century, early 20th century, this idea of talking to the dead. So he became very mystical. He exchanged letters, I think, with Stravinsky, but his ideas were mostly sort of contained in the Futurist Manifesto and not widely spread around. For example, he had his work played in, or he was involved in performances in Paris in, I think, 1920. 1923, I got the date wrong, he had his stuff played in Prague, and I don't think he was able to go because he didn't have money to go. But in any case, he was a soldier, he fought for the Italians, be weird if he fought for the Portuguese, and he lived off this pension, which was not very generous, and he wanted to paint for the rest of his life. I think he was very limited as an actual artist. I think he was wonderful as a theoretician. But I think we're all indebted to the art of noises and his ideas from early 20th century Italy.